right, welcome back in. Time in the Princeton Orthopedic Associates Studios 420. This is the Zach Gelb Show. Howie Roseman did address the media today at the NovaCare Complex. A lot going on as this offseason is imperative for the success of the Philadelphia Eagles, and someone that does a great job covering the Birds for a very long time for the Philadelphia Daily News is Les Bowen, who's kind enough to give us a few minutes right now. Les, always appreciated, and how are you?
I'm just great, Zach. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great, and we appreciate you coming on. So I thought the biggest takeaway today was when Howie Roseman defined Joe Douglas's role with the team. Just how do you evaluate that relationship with Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas right now?
Well, I've barely met Joe Douglas, but certainly Howie was touting that today. I think Howie understands that there's a good bit of skepticism in the fan base and the media right now about the Eagles' personnel operation, given that Howie has had a large role in it, except for that 1 year of Chip Kelly's control, for quite a long time, and they really haven't done a whole lot. And I think he was selling us Joe Douglas today as the guy that is going to make a difference, that they're going to be looking for different things in players, and that he has the personnel eye and so forth to give them the kind of draft picks they need to build around Carson Wentz. We don't really have any idea if this is the case. Joe Douglas worked for the Ravens for a long time. They certainly have a very respected personnel operation. Then he spent a year with the Bears before coming here. We'll just have to see if that's really the case.
Les, overall, did you like what you heard from Howie Roseman today?
You know, it was all right. It wasn't terrible. It was a very sometimes when we do these things with Howie, we do them sitting around the conference table, and that's way better. Howie was behind a lectern today. He read a prepared statement, and then he took questions, and cameras were rolling, and it was very, I felt, stilted. There was a real reluctance to address anything in any kind of substance. You couldn't get any kind of feel for if he thinks, for example, bringing back Benny Logan is realistic, or if they're going to have to maybe restructure Jason Peters to keep him. You couldn't even get him to address areas of need. His explanation was that other teams would hear this, like it's a huge secret that the Eagles need corners and wide receivers. I think the other teams are just going to be shocked if that comes out. But it was a half hour of give and take, and as the time went on, I thought he did a better job of answering questions. But I could have used a little more honesty, a little more forthrightness about where they are and how they're going to get to where they need to be.
And you take a look at this team, we all know that cornerbacks and wide receivers, like you were saying, as we're talking to Les Bowen of the Philadelphia Daily News, is clearly the two most important needs on this team. Other people look at offensive line, and I think this offensive line has a little bit more depth than people think. And I know Peters is getting older, and eventually we'll have to replace him and find another tackle. How do you evaluate this current offensive line situation, Les?
Well, I think by having to play all these guys, the rookies this year, like Halapoulivaati Vaitai and Isaac Suomalo, I think you gained a lot going into next season, depending on what you lose, of course. If you lose Wisniewski in free agency, if you decide to cut Alan Barber, then you're kind of, back scrambling in the weeds. But other than the fact that they're relying on Jason Peters, again, to be healthy, I think it's a good offensive line. You're going to take the best players available in the early rounds, but I don't see any big focus on the offensive line in the early rounds. Certainly they'll add some people there. They'll look at free agency there, but not as not for any kind of marquee position or anything like that. I think they're set up pretty well, frankly. I think the five that you saw starting in the season finale are going to be the five that start in 2017 unless something happens.
The most exciting part to me, Les, of this press conference were the subtle shots at Chip Kelly. And he didn't come out and name Chip personally. We all know that. But how about those shots that I interpreted were shots today from Howie Roseman talking about the Chip Kelly era?
Yeah, this is something he kind of refrained from doing this publicly a year ago. But as we get deeper into it, it's clear when we're talking about the Eagles not having salary cap room and having to really scramble to create room for free agency, when we talk about them not having offensive weapons, this is the reason. Chip's year, really the whole 3-year Chip Kelly era, they were shedding offensive talent in Deshaun Jackson and Jeremy Maclin, in LaShawn McCoy, even in Evan Mathis, who certainly helped the marquee guys do what they needed to do. So I think Howie's just saying, look, I'm kind of dealing with a mess here, and he is, and he has been. That's not to say that you can't do a good job of cleaning up a mess, but yeah, it's a mess, and he made that crack about he wished he had a DeLorean to go back into the past and undo some of these things.
Well, he has a chance to do that in this offseason. I know he's a little bit older, but Deshaun Jackson is still a productive player. If you were handicapping this thing, what do you think the chances are that Deshaun returns to South Philadelphia?
Boy, no more than 50-50. I mean, Deshaun at age 30, going on 31 next season, it all depends. If you get him for a good price and if he's willing to, do a lot of off-season work and stuff like that, sure. But if you're going to get into some insane bidding war and pay top-of-the-market value for Deshaun at this point in his career, you have to be careful. Yes, he's way better than what they had out there on the field this season, but so is almost anything. He's not what he was 3 or 4 years ago. He's not a Pro Bowl player. He's a guy that gets shut down in crucial situations, as in that game that the Redskins had to win to make the playoffs last weekend. I'm really leery of the fan base seeing Deshaun as a panacea, because this isn't 2010, and it'd be a nice complimentary piece to have, but that can't be the focus of your off season, and that can't be what you pin your hopes on.
I agree with you. I don't think you go overpay Deshaun Jackson at some absurd rate, and I think he could be a nice complimentary player still to this football team. What do you think a fair deal at this age for Philadelphia would be for Deshaun Jackson?
It would be less to me about the overall money than about how it is structured. I would want a deal that is heavily incentivized for games played, for workout bonuses, off the field stuff. If he hits all of that stuff, if he's healthy and is doing all the work in the off season, then sure, make it possible for him to make, $8 or $10 million. But I wouldn't give him that just because he's Deshaun Jackson and he once used to be really good,
I hear you. Les Bowen with us from the Philadelphia Daily News. So with Howie, there's some things I liked today. There's some things I didn't like. Ultimately, he needs to hit on this draft and the next draft and both these next 2 free agency years if the Eagles are going to want to have success. We all know that. One thing I didn't like, though, and that was his comments on Eric Rowe and how quick the evaluation was. Let me just preface by saying this. I watch every Patriots game. Eric Rowe is not this great player this year, but he's been a nice role player. I thought that evaluation of Eric Rowe was a bit bizarre, Les.
Yeah, here's what, Howie was trying to dance through this. But here's what happened. They made a scheme change and a defensive coordinator change from Bill Davis to Jim Schwartz, and Schwartz just didn't like Rowe. I don't think he liked his personality. Eric's kind of a soft-spoken guy. Jim likes brash, finger-wagging like Jalen Mills, dyed green hair, aggressive. I just don't think Jim took to the guy, and Eric did struggle in trying to learn Jim's system. He had to do things a little differently. Eric's best thing is running down the field on a really just a fly pattern with a guy. It's really hard to shake Eric Rowe in that situation. But some of the other coverages, he he kind of was slow to adapt to. And rather than work with him, I think Jim Schwartz kind of wanted him out of here. And they got him out of here, and they got something for him. And Howie said some stuff today about, well, we knew we weren't going to be able to re-sign him in 2 or 3 years or something. That's just absurd. I'm sorry. That has nothing to do with anything. They got him out of here because Schwartz didn't want him. And at that point, Schwartz is the defensive coordinator. You're not going to fire Schwartz. You're going to do what he says you have to do. But it's a mistake, yeah. And I think Howie even there was something at the end of his remark where he said something along the lines of, you do the best with the information you have at that time. Like, to me, indicating, had I really seen the full picture here, maybe I would have told Schwartz he just had to put up with the guy for a while or something.
Especially with the talent on this roster at cornerback, they could use him.
It's tragic because Eric Rowe is the best corner they've drafted since 2002, and to just send him away after a year just put them in a deeper hole at that position.
Another thing I didn't like, and I'm not going to expect a front office executive member to go on out and bash too many players. I didn't anticipate that walking into the NovaCare complex today. I didn't like what I heard about Vinny Curry. Is there any hope left with Vinny Curry, or are they just going to have to stick with the contract that they gave him and hope that he turns into something? Because I don't see the hope right now, Les.
Well, I don't know. I mean, as usual, the issue with Vinny was snaps. He got something like 40% of the snaps, even though they gave him this ginormous contract. Will he be a better player if he plays more? That seems to be the implication that we're getting. Howie talked about him adapting to the scheme, and he's getting better and better in the scheme, and he's, they feel confident he'll continue to develop. I think that's kind of what they have to say. They can't get out of the deal at this point. The dead cap money would be enormous, and I don't think anybody's trading for him at that salary. So they kind of have to get through another year or two of this. And frankly, if they can't bring back Connor Barwin, they can't get a restructuring done with him, then he's going to have to start next year, unless they draft a defensive end who's really, really good. So they're trying to do the best they can. Vinny isn't terrible, but Howie went on this splurge last year of kind of justifying all the guys that he drafted, when he was in charge, re-signing all of them to big money deals and talking about how important it is to retain your core players. Well, it is important, but it's also important not to overvalue them just because you drafted them. And you see that with Vinny's deal. You see it a little bit in Zach Ertz's deal. Zach Ertz is a nice player, but he's not Travis Kelce. You might even say you see it in Fletcher Cox's deal. Fletcher Cox is a very good player, a Pro Bowl player. He is not one of the top 2 or 3 defensive players in the league, which is how he's being paid. That's just an overriding issue with Howie is he wants to justify his draft picks, and the Vinny Curry deal is probably the best illustration of that we have right now.
And I think that overspending, it's ultimately going to cost you Benny Logan. I just don't see a way with the cap and how it's figured out that Benny Logan's going to be returning to the Eagles next year.
Well, there are a lot of, probably not. I mean, I think you're right, but there are so many guys you can restructure and money that you carry over, and the cap always ends up looking. This time last year, everybody was wringing their hands about the cap, and then Howie went and traded away Byron Maxwell and DeMarco Murray, and suddenly the cap looked different. So I'm not ready to sort of bid farewell to Benny Logan yet, but it's chances are against it, no question.
On the way out with Les Bowen, does a tremendous job covering the Eagles for the Philadelphia Daily News. Actually, the most eventful thing in Week 17, it had nothing to do on the field. I was following the play-by-play of your tweets on the press box incident with Jeff McLane. Just describe to me what you saw, because I've been in a lot of press boxes, Les, and obviously I'm a lot younger than the traditional media member, but I've never seen or heard anything like what was going on in that press box on Sunday.
Yeah, I never have either, Zach. And now that we've had several days, I kind of think that was one of the factors here is that the Eagles executive who had Jeff McLane ejected from Lincoln Financial Field, until a few years ago, she had never worked in sports media, and she had never worked in press boxes. And I don't think, and I'm not taking up for her in any way whatsoever, but I don't think she grasped how extreme an action this was and how unprecedented an action this was and what the fallout would be, even though I tried to warn her of the fallout while this was going on. I said, this is going to be a really big deal. You really want to do this. She said she did. And Jeff McLane was ejected from the press box just for having a discussion with an Eagles media relations person about how loudly we were talking. And I've never seen anything to beat it. I really haven't.
You've been in a press box in multiple sports for a very long time, and we all know that you and Jeff at one time had a contentious relationship, and we saw how passionate and how fired up you were about this. Just talk about, and take the listener in on it, about just how much covering sports and being in a press box has changed from basically when you first started till up until now in what is now the year of 2017.
Well, I don't know that it's changed all that much. My situation, I write for the Daily News. My situation has changed in that even though the Daily News and the Inquirer have always been owned by the same company, we now share a newsroom and, we're more explicitly partnered than we were even 5 years ago. So there's not the kind of edge to competing that there might have once been, and there's not any kind of personal, animosity, which might have existed in previous years going with that competition. But as far as the press box goes, there's just a lot more people there than there used to be. There's so many like ESPN.com and people who write for radio websites and things like that just didn't exist 10 or 15 or 20 years ago.
Well, Les, we appreciate the time today. I thought your tone was acceptable for this interview, and we'll have you on again real soon.
I hate to be ejected from the radio.
Yeah. Well, I could just hang up on you, That's how we do it here. It doesn't cause a big scene. But Les, thanks so much.
Thank you, Zach. Bye-bye.